Okay, now it's the question and answer period. Like I said before, if we could try to be respectful of each other, one question at a time. And if you have a second question, we're gonna ask that you hold it until somebody else gets to go. And if we have enough time, we'll come back to you. If your question doesn't get answered and you wrote it on the card, we'll collect the cards and make sure that they get to the right person, agency, department, so that your questions and concerns can be met. Okay, with that, is there a question on the floor? Yes.
Marie Gillespie. You said that as you looked for the site for the compressor station, you evaluated the land mass and the opportunity to connect with another gas line. Several other things you mentioned that you checked on as you decided to choose the site that you did. But I didn't hear you say anything about the population that was living in that area. Did you check with that population to see whether, what size it was, whether, did it have anything that was specific that needed to be preserved? So the other external things, but the human factor seems to have been missing from that first evaluation.
We'll answer that question in two pieces. So the driver for locating the pipeline, as you said, is you're looking for a location that intersects the pipeline. You're looking for flat land. Once that route is selected, there is a detailed analysis done, called consultations done with historical resource organizations to understand what's under that land, who lives on that land, and the historical significance of that. So that work was done. And what I was saying earlier is that what we didn't expand that to, and what we are learning that we need to do, is look not just on the land we're touching and that we're acquiring, but also surrounding that. And so that's an opportunity for us to be better. It would have been better if we were here 2 years ago having this conversation, but we're here now. And again, we did do a very detailed analysis of the land that we are on to assess whether there were any historical resources there, and we are confident that they're not, that we are aware of.
Now, from an operations perspective, again, I mentioned the site itself, it was selected based on the hydraulics of the gas. So when you look at that gas flow, as that pressure drops, also the velocity increases. So that actually also causes your losses to go up and increase as you go down the line. So really it's an engineering-based model that actually goes out and looks at the hydraulics, what's the most efficient design to be able to space our compressor stations so that we can move gas across the system, meet our customer commitments, and incorporate into that is where gas is coming on the system, where our deliveries are going off to our customers. So it is a design system to be able to meet those needs and operate an efficient pipeline. And then, like I say, once we get an area identified, then we start looking for availability of property, access to roads, utilities, level property is preferred as to a property that you have to do a lot of site work on. So that also cuts down and minimizes any impacts. So that's really the key drivers as to Buckingham being a relay station, Buckingham Station being here in this area. That was the driver in that process.
Questions?
One at a time, thank you.
I got you. I was just letting you know you may come back. And most of my questions, I am a registered nurse, and I spent most of my career in pediatrics. And so most of my questions deal with safety. And I want to know, what kind of safety emergencies do you plan for? Are you planning for respiratory emergencies, or are you planning for burns? What are you, in your emergency plan, what kind of emergencies are you planning for? That's question one.
Yeah, I mean, our emergency plans are focused on a unified command. If you look at, again, I mentioned we meet with our local emergency responders in advance. We talk about what we do, what type of particular emergencies you may have. I mean, you could have a gas leak. You need to evacuate an area. So I mean, that's just one example. But what we do is we work with emergency responders to make sure they have the proper training. If you look at your emergency responders, they are certified, they're trained to deal with different types of medical conditions. Our purpose is to help them understand what type of scenarios or emergency situations we may be into that they have to respond to. And again, we work hand in hand. When we come on site, we set up a unified command. We're communicating with them firsthand in the unified command center. We're providing information about our facilities, what the situation may be, and really the emergency responders are making an interpretation and it's making the decisions as far as what response they need to do to make sure the public's protected. Now, in that whole process, we work in advance to make sure they have the proper training, they have the proper equipment they need, but they are medically trained, so we don't get involved as far as the medical part of it, but through working with them, we make sure that they understand what the scenarios may be, they've got the proper training and equipment.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Mosley. On our last meeting, we had some discussion about the committee that was formed, the things that the community would like to have. I feel that there are some people that's on that committee that live in this area. It should be based on the ones that live in here that have ideals of what they want. Like we talked about it, and we would like a community center, some emergency system set up, and a couple other things that we talked about, but I feel that need to be addressed.
So I think that was Ms. Mosley? Ms. Mosley was saying that there's the community partnership that we've established. There are some other individuals that are interested in being involved in that. So we're working with Basil to identify folks for that. So we have your name, we know you, and we'll follow up. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for the Dominion folks for coming here. And I'm Jiva Abate. I live 5 miles away and represent Yogaville and Union Hill here because we're all kind of in the same boat with pipelines and compressor stations. So 3 years ago, we had a computer station advisory group meeting, and it was pulled together much like this other discussion group that you're talking about forming. So we've had 3 years of telling you we needed a safety plan, an evacuation plan, and I was with the first responders in my group, and over 2 months we determined we needed an additional fast responding fire truck. So we're here 3 years later, and we're still talking about forming another group and discussing it further. I always, in my business life, always would say, show me the money. Is there a budget for these things that you're offering, or is this more discussion? And second of all, we were told by Emma Toms, buy your own fire truck. I felt that was a little short shrift because we were honestly participating in a discussion group about safety for the compressor station. So none of you folks were there. I know it's none of your issue, but there should be meeting minutes, and you should have developed this plan. In fact, I'd like to see the plan you're talking about, because I know there's no evacuation plan. There's no specific plan to Buckingham. We were told last meeting you were going to write it. So I appreciate your coming and all the discussion, but these folks, our neighborhoods, we want to actually see response. And so far, it has been zip. So please understand how we might not feel confident that having another discussion group about safety would not deliver safety. Thank you.
So was there a question?
Well, is there a safety plan? Can we see it?
Yeah, and again, I was not involved in the reference letter, but, you know, I think we do have a commitment. I don't know if we determined if the committee members are going to be participants on our committee, but we are committed. We're going to meet and see, let the committee work through that and see what the gaps are. We do have a general emergency plan. It's been part of our emergency plan for years at Dominion. And again, that references our 14 scenarios. It talks about operations response to those scenarios. We have developed a site-specific plan. And you know, normally a site-specific plan we have in place prior to going into construction or going into service. And you're right, we did not have a plan at the last meeting. We have a draft plan that we have put together that we've filled out, all the information. There's still some details to be completed as we get through construction and facilities in place as we finalize that. But we do have a draft plan that does reference the site specifics. And it does talk about all the emergency, we have all the emergency contact information in there. What we do not have loaded in there yet is the alarm summaries from the facilities until we get the final engineering drawings for those. That details the alarm summaries, but those will be added to the plan. So we do have a site-specific
How
plan.
about evacuation? You're going to be monitoring this from West Virginia. How do these folks know if there's a fire that they're going to be alerted and guided to a safe evacuation?
Yeah, you got to look at a station versus facilities, pipeline. And again, there are references to evacuation plans, but the part of that is we rely on our emergency responders. We provide training, and we develop that. We work with them together to talk about evacuation, safe areas. But in event of emergency, just like you have a car, they don't know until they get out there and evaluate that what specific actions they're going to have to take. And the same thing with any other type of incident. So it really is through that training, through that knowledge, they're DOT trained to be able to make that determination once you get out there. And our purpose is to set up a unified command. So we're sitting there side by side with emergency responders. So we provide them all the information on our system, what's happening on the system, and they can make a determination based on their skill and their training that we've helped provide on what evacuation. But you cannot write a specific evacuation plan that says, if this happens here, you go here. And last thing you want is somebody out there with a manual. You want to show up with knowledge to evaluate and to be able to make those determinations and evacuate. And we rely on the emergency responders and through their skill. They're the experts.
They're 20, 30 minutes away though. They're not right here. So that's a problem.
Yeah, let me tell you the key element. The compressor station itself, emergency shutdown. Once that emergency shutdown activates, all valves go to a safe position, all gas is evacuated out of that facility. There's no gas remaining inside the fence. So you've taken away the ignition source. Now on the pipeline, we have automatic valves along the pipeline that we can activate, that our gas control center can trigger, that actually will immediately isolate in an emergency, they'll close those valves. You've taken away the source. Now any type of a release will immediately start diminishing. So you've taken that away. So that's a critical part when you start looking at emergency response, is to isolate the source, let it evacuate itself out, it'll immediately start diminishing, and you've taken it with the risk will immediately start to subside. And that's a critical part of that. But we do work with emergency responders across the system, and most of them, high majority of them are volunteer groups.
Evacuating that gas, is that what's called a blowdown? And if so, what is the sound rating during a blowdown? I've heard it's comparable to a jet engine and may go on for some amount of time.
Yeah, on a blowdown, a compressor station, you talk about an emergency shutdown event. We actually have a blowdown silencer. It's a lot like the exhaust on your car. It actually baffles the sound. And actually, if the gas that's evacuated through a blowdown silencer actually will be at the same 55 dB at the property line as the station is when it's operating. So when those valves close in that vent, it actually has a restriction plate in there that controls the flow through those baffles. And like I say, it's just like the muffler on your car. It actually dampen that sound. So it is designed for 55 dB, the same as our station design. Yes.
Lakshmi Fjord, moved to Buckingham in 1979. Not lived here as long as most of you My questions or comments, and they're questions too, that have to do with the compressor station design, the application process, and so forth. So you say that 111, you've designed and operate 111 compressor stations over 100-year period. Yet, 9 days ago, Mike Dowd told us in an informational meeting that many of us were at, that actually the air permit that had been given for this compressor station and the technology that had been submitted by Dominion was so poor, it actually failed the permit. It's the only permit, he said this in public, that has failed. And the reason is it wasn't best in class, even though the original application also claimed that it was. So Mr. Dowd went into great detail with us about that problem, and then the fact that learning about the environmental justice issue here had propelled the DEQ to work more closely with Dominion to really make those adjustments, but they weren't in your plan, even though you have that long experience. And so our concern is we've met closely with the people from Leesburg who've come here and given us their experience many times. And they have a very small compressor station, like 1/4 the size perhaps of this one. And it's been so problematic that the community that you said called you in actually kicked out the idea of expanding that compressor station. So that and the application, so I worked on our historic preservation application for this community with Mr. White, of course, as the leader. And actually the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation censored this project for not having done the appropriate historic preservation work, and FERC agreed with them, and they based that on something that I wrote about what wasn't in your application about historic preservation. So this is a process issue, this is an information issue, that you're saying that this has all been done as if from the beginning. But what we understand is that all of the people of Union Hill speaking up and asking for recognition and the history that we've developed is why you're here, because you weren't here and doing these things before. And so we're very concerned that this is just one of those, like, you're worried, and that so the community should feel empowered. Thank you.
Is there a question?
So, the one thing I'd like to address is Mr. Dowd's comment. So, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Dowd, but it is typical, anytime you're making an application to the DEQ, that your initial application, they're going to basically give it back to you and say, you know, we'd like to see this, we'd like to see that. So when he says rejected, all of the technology I talked about was in that initial application. Now, what we work with through DEQ, since that initial application to this draft permit, is how that technology is reflected in the permit, what limits we take, what type of operational restrictions we take to really enforce that technology. That's what we had worked on over several years with DEQ, is how we take the technology we had proposed and how DEQ wanted to enforce it.
Can I just respond? We had a 2-hour meeting with him beforehand in which he and Pat said they brought that R&D to you, that it wasn't in the application, that they made many suggestions and changes. So between the two of you, but that was in a public meeting, we videotaped it, I'm not making it up. So there's a difference, you're claiming that technology, they're claiming that technology, but it wasn't, according to the regulatory agency, it wasn't there.
And I was not in that private meeting.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you was the technology we're talking about, selective catalytic reduction, oxidation catalyst, vent gas recovery, all of that was in the initial application. What I believe they were referring to is we took no credit for vent gas recovery We told them we were going to put it on, but we said we don't want to take any credit for it. Now, they came back to us and said, no, if you're going to put it on, you have to have restrictions on it, X, Y, Z. They did work with us on how we could best reduce the amount of venting. We did spend several months discussing that. How can we reduce venting even further? So, I mean, maybe sometime I can walk through the initial application with you and I can show you the technology where it's outlined in there, and maybe that will work.
I just provide them his expertise, yeah.
I wanted to thank you all for coming out. I have a question about your past history and how you work with communities. I think communication is key in just about everything you do. And one of the things I know that we have an issue with here in our community is communications. So I wanted to know if you all have any influential power, if you will, in various different communities, if you have any past history in being able to help, say for example, internet, with phone communication companies, maybe trying to help the community out as far as, how should I say, I want to see the community more empowered. And the reason why I bring that up, like some of the other ideas that I mentioned in the past, we have a community that is dying. And so through various different programs that you may have, I'd love to see it be invigorated, that our community be self-sustained somehow.
So I'll think of that question. So I'll start by talking about from the general. So Dominion, through our foundation and through our corporate entity, we donate and give over $20 million a year. Footprint expands, we increase our giving, our investment, our collaboration. You know, a large part of our business is economic development. Whenever there's a new facility, a new company comes to town, anywhere in our footprint, we are at the table and part of that conversation. And we will frequently engage in efforts to help create and entice that economic development opportunity to come to fruition. So that's kind of the general answer. So specifically, the most specific recent large-scale project that we have launched was Cove Point. And with Cove Point, we work with first responders. We did help them identify additional equipment that was needed, and we supported that effort. We did a number of things on the shoreline and coastline from an environmental perspective to improve sustainability, and all of that's published and online. You can find out about that. When we go into, I got the benefit personally of operating 7 power plants over a couple of years ago. In each of those communities, in many cases, those plants have been there for several years, but we made sure we invested with the volunteer fire departments to make sure they had appropriate training and equipment. We would provide additional, job training and outreach, and in some cases, sponsorship of community events as well as facilities, as the case would be. So we try to find ways, based upon what the community kind of calls upon us to do, to engage. And so that's why I'm saying that there really is an open slate right now for us to begin to think about opportunities and to develop some ideas. We were having dinner tonight, and several folks talked about the fact that there aren't any gathering spaces in this end of the county. There aren't any bike trails. Someone said, well, wouldn't it be great if there was a lake with bike trails and that type of thing. And so again, that's something we hadn't thought about. That's not something that was on our short list. But again, we're taking that feedback, we're listening to it, and where there are opportunities to prioritize and make something like that happen, we're going to be open to exploring that with you. So no short list specifically, but again, where we are, we invest, we partner with the school systems, we invest in the community with facilities and sponsorships, and we will respond to needs that are brought to our attention.
And I believe you made a statement that this location was chosen because of an existing pipeline? Sir? Okay. So my question is that all of these other states and communities that are predominantly black or people of color just happen to be at the right location? Because it's a known fact that most of these compressor stations and factories are placed in communities where they're either poor people, people of color. So is that just a coincidence, or what's the problem?
So I'll take this as more of an abstract question. And this is about this concept of environmental justice. And it is true that historically, industrial infrastructure is placed where property is least expensive. Now the fact that the property is least expensive frequently coincides with the fact that it is a lower income, more than likely minority community. And so for years, you're right, generations, infrastructure, potentially infrastructure that could be deemed to be pollutants or what have you, were co-located in communities of color or in communities where there were lower incomes. And so part of the environmental justice movement that started in earnest in the 60s and 70s was to raise attention to that, and was to require individuals to come to the table and to begin to really unpack that and understand, why is this asset going here? Is this the case that this is going here solely because of the disadvantaged nature of this community, or is there some other reason? And so every application that goes to FERC and the EPA has to go through an environmental justice screen. Now here's what I will tell you, is that screen isn't always as robust as it should be. They don't always ask all the tough questions. They don't always go knock on the doors in every community. And that's something that at Dominion Energy, and I will say, frankly, as the General Counsel, it is part of my responsibility now to make sure that we do that, and to make sure that we engage those communities, and to make sure that when we are siting a site, that someone asks the question: is this the right place? Why are we putting it there? Should it go there? Are there other locations that could be less intrusive? And if we're going to go there, what are we going to do to make sure that community benefits? That's one of the reasons I'm here, because it's important to me. And so that's an honest answer to your question. I'm not going to deny that there has been a history in the past that companies, many companies, have engaged in siting of assets in areas based upon where they would find the least resistance. But that is not why this pipeline is here. This pipeline is here because we're building a 600-mile pipeline. The engineering suggested that this is where it should go. It intersects with a pipeline that was a major customer. And so that is why it was sited here. But you're right, that is a concern, and that's why it's important that communities like this speak up, that we engage, that we have honest conversations about how we are going to work together to make sure that any project, any investment, any infrastructure ends up being a win-win for the communities we're involved in.
My name is Sharon Ponton, and I don't remember your name, but the environmental gentleman. You stood up and said that the compressor station is 4 to 10 times more stringent than any compressor station that's being built in Virginia or across the country. And I guess even if that's true, the compressor station will still emit thousands of tons of pollutants in this community that it currently does not have. And I guess I want to know why you don't think the community deserves to know what those pollutants are, and how they're going to affect their safety and their health. And I know that there have been questions here in these meetings before about health. We've had the same lady ask questions, because I know that she has said repeatedly she's an RN, and she's asked about the health effects of all of this on this community. And Dominion has not stood up and told any of the facts about the pollutants that will be emitted from this compressor station. And even if it's 4 times to 10 times more stringent, there will still be pollutants that are going to affect the health of the members of this community. And I think that, Dominion is standing here saying you're being honest and you're coming to this community to make things right.
Let me unpack your question a little bit. You know, one of your comments was, we haven't shown you what pollutants we're going to emit. I would highly encourage you to go to DEQ's website, look at the air permit. There are detailed tables full of every pollutant that we're going to emit.
I understand.
That we've calculated, we provided to DEQ verifies them, and they've now, you know, put that out in the public's eye. You asked about the health effects of those pollutants. I mentioned earlier the air modeling, which is not required for a minor source. We went through this air modeling specifically to show that the emissions from the compressor station, including all the background, were far below the thresholds that EPA established to protect human health and the environment. So we've done the modeling to help provide you some assurance that the emissions that you see that are on the DEQ website for our draft permit, that those emissions are below the standards that EPA says, hey, above this threshold, that's where there's human health impacts. So we're below those standards. If you were at the DEQ informational briefing, they also talked about the state has toxic air standards. We also did modeling for toxic air standards. Again, we were below the standard for what they said would affect human health.
How many thousands of tons?
Somebody wants a question.
Part of making things right is telling the facts, and I haven't heard the facts.
Yeah, this has been a stunning presentation, I must say. I'd really like to hear some details about the evacuation plan. 56 is considered an evacuation route, and this compressor station is right on top of 56. So how does that allow it to continue to be an evacuation route for the entire state? Our understanding is that the industry standard for compressor stations is every 40 to 50 miles, so of, you know, around 12,000 horsepower. And now for this pipeline, we're talking 3 compressor stations, this one to be 57,000, which is humongous. And we also understand that that these pipelines in our neighborhood would be 75% less thickness than in more dense neighborhoods, 75%. So how can you guarantee us that our safety? So I would like some details, like is there going to be an alarm system going off? Are we all going to hear it over in Yogaville? I mean, are they going to hear it in Dillman? And what exactly is the blast zone, the incineration zone? What do you consider right now?
Okay, we'll take the.
About the PIR, potential impact and radius, is that your question? I know you had several comments there, so I'll make sure I address it properly.
Let's call it the incineration zone, because that's what it is.
But it's a big misconception, and I'll tell you why. If you look at the industry, and everyone talks about, you talk about this, what you're calling the incineration zone, impacted radius. It's actually called a PIR, potential impact radius. Back in 2000, the Gas Research Institute hired a company called CEPR out of Canada, a Canadian research company, to come in and look at the thermal effect of a pipeline failure or fire. And what that effect would have on the general public, and what that aerial extent would be. Now, when you look at that particular study, and the CEPR study, and the potential impact radius, there are several things you need to understand. First, worst case scenario. The assumption was it was based solely on thermal heat from the fire. It assumed an indefinite supply. So it basically said worst case conditions, pipeline, full failure, full source of gas, endless supply, the thermal radiation, thermal heat source was there indefinitely. And what it did, it went out and looked at data and identified a boundary that it said, okay, this is your PIR boundary. It basically said, if you are on this side of this boundary, a wooden structure would be sustainable indefinitely without any impact. Human life would be sustainable indefinitely without any impact. So that was called the PIR, the potential impact radius. Now, A couple things in that is that it doesn't say that if you're on this side of the line, it's your incineration line, as you referred to. All that says is if it's a wooden structure or dwelling within that area, it would need to have, for sustainable, long-term thermal heat effect, you would have to have some level of protection to protect that dwelling, or some individual would have to either shelter in place, or if the heat extent of that is for an extended period of time, they may have to evacuate out of that area. Now, if you look at the calculation that goes into that, it's 0.69 times the diameter times the square root of the pressure is what the potential impact radius is. For this particular pipeline, that's 1,100 foot corridor. Now, if you take 1,100 foot around our station, there are no dwellings within that 1,100 foot corridor, as noted. So really, that is what the PIR calculation says and what it stands for. So now, the other thing you got to realize is the compressor station, in event of a failure, emergency shutdown, isolation, valves closed, all valves go to safety position, valve vents all through the blowdown silencer, all the gas is evacuated out of the facility. Your thermal heat source immediately goes away. On the pipeline, first, if there's a failure, you have a pipeline component, then gas control can hit the remote control valve, immediately isolate, and immediately that fire starts to diminish. So the PIR calculation, when you look at it, your endless supply, for one, has went away. It immediately diminishes. It doesn't just sit there and burn for hours at a full intensity. It immediately diminishes. So there's a lot of things in that calculation that really, that's where the misconception is. Everybody thinks, that PIR, it's the incineration zone, where really, if you look at the assumptions of what went into that model, that's totally false.
But the valves are like 15 miles apart, 15 to 20. And if it explodes.
I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank Dominion for the expense and impressive. The meal was great, and just want to thank all of you for coming and for sharing and for taking time out of your busy schedules because of your concern about a proposed compressor station, about a proposed pipeline, and about your concern for the Union Hill, Union Road community. I wanted to say from the offset that our church, that we are adamantly against the compressor station and the pipeline. And we're doing everything that we can, humanly possible, to stop this situation. And so, and we're not planning on giving up. Okay? But we do know that, we recognize that it is a formidable task. One of the concerns that I have, one question that I really want to put forth is that hear about Dominion being such a great partner. And Carlos, I'm glad to hear because you are a top executive with Dominion, and that you admitted to the indiscretions of all large industries throughout the years. And so we were glad to hear that. One of our concerns has been because we feel that we were purposely omitted from the FERC statement, minimized, and that caused a lot of suspicion. But there is still the element of we're talking about a lot of things, and people have a lot of hope about a lot of things, and a lot of us have different agendas, okay? And we recognize that, and everyone has a right to that. My concern is about a commitment if this thing comes about, okay? If it comes about. I'm talking about a real continuing commitment from Dominion prior to getting everything that Dominion wants, because it's bigger than what you can discuss in 1 hour. And And we've done some in-depth work. Okay? So there's a lot more to this conversation. And so I'm concerned about if this thing does come about, the real commitment. I mean, there are questions about water. Everybody out here is on well, you know, and those are some serious questions for us, you know. Even at, we're about 1 mile from the proposed compressor station, but there's still questions about water damage here, even with the well at this facility, you know. And so those are the kind of questions that really aren't being really answered for us. And there is no, you know, I'm not interested in some type of community center, that kind of, I'm interested in more, okay? And we would like to hear some real commitment, okay? Not just a promise, okay? And that's part of what we want to see, okay? So I'm just going to leave it at that, because once I start talking about this situation, I mean, you guys have been on the job a long time, but I've been on the job now almost 4 years too, and I've done a lot of homework. You know, I'm looking at things about when the pipeline talks about capacity and all of these, you know, what it all means, and the political moves that were made. I look at all of that, and so, and the real underlying motives, because as you've already stated to me, it's about economics, okay? And so that's where I am on that. So I guess that's enough about it. But these are some of the real concerns, not just the window dressing, okay? And I know that you all take your job seriously, but there is still a bigger picture that we really need to look at. And it really needs to be questioned. And I'm talking about some solid answers. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I want to thank you for coming. The big tent was nice, but I'm an air conditioning man, so I was glad when we came in the building. Okay? And by the way, the catering service that you all utilize, are any of those folk in here? I want to say that they did a fantastic job. Anytime you have chicken, preaching, and you had 2 different choices, I was pleased. So, again, I just want to say thank you.
In my exuberance, I was supposed to do an invocation, and I omitted that. But if you would bear with me, I'd like to end in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together in fellowship, to listen, to learn, to open our minds and hearts, and so that we may hear and that we may engage. Lord, we ask that you would allow us to continue in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration. There are questions that are yet to be answered. There are questions that are yet to be asked. But give us the opportunity, Heavenly Father, to come together in the spirit of collaboration, cooperation, to find those answers. And if we can't agree to disagree in a respectful manner. Heavenly Father, we pray for this Union Hill community. We pray for its history. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for what it has meant to this community in Buckingham, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, for the great things that have come out of it. But Lord, we know that there are still greater things that can come. And let this be an opportunity, Father, for us to chart a new path, a new course together, so that we can find ways to enhance, improve, and grow the growing traditions of this community going forward. We thank you for the fellowship. Thank you for the time. We ask you to give traveling grace to everyone as they return to their various destinations, that we find it better when they return than it was when they left. We say we pray, amen.